The harsh April wind whipped dust across Desdemona, Texas, as Beatrice Faulkner clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, staring at the weathered sign of the Widow Jenkins boarding house, her final refuge in a world that had turned its back on her. The year was 1875, and at 22, Beatrice had already experienced more sorrow than most endured in a lifetime. 3 weeks ago, her father had been lowered into the ground, leaving behind nothing but debts and the small mercantile store that had been their livelihood. 2 days after the funeral, the bank had seized everything, including the modest home where she'd been born. With no family left and nowhere to turn, Beatrice had spent her last coins on a room at the widow's boarding house, but even that meager sanctuary would be lost to her by week's end. "Miss Faulkner," Widow Jenkins called from the doorway, her weathered face a mask of practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "A word, if you please." Beatrice nodded, following the older woman inside. The boarding house was clean but sparse, smelling of lye soap and yesterday's stew. "Your week is up tomorrow," the widow reminded her unnecessarily. "I don't suppose you've had any luck finding employment." "No, madam," Beatrice admitted. She had tried every establishment in Desdemona, the general store, the dressmaker's shop, even the saloon, though she'd drawn the line at certain types of work. But with the drought affecting business throughout the county, no one was hiring. The widow sighed. "I'm sorry, dear, but business is business. I can't afford charity cases." "I understand," Beatrice said, though panic fluttered in her chest. "Perhaps one more day there's another option," Widow Jenkins interrupted, her expression brightening. "Quentin Vance is looking for a wife." Beatrice stared at the woman in confusion. "The rancher, but I don't even know him." "He owns the Circle V, 3,000 acres and growing. He needs a woman to keep house and bear children. You need a roof over your head." The widow's practicality was brutal. "He's placed an advertisement in the newspaper. 3 women have already turned him down because he's a bit rough around the edges, but he's wealthy and he's not cruel." "You're suggesting I marry a stranger?" Beatrice's voice rose in disbelief. "I'm suggesting you survive," the widow countered. "My husband's been dead 8 years. If a suitable man had offered marriage, I'd have accepted. Pride is a luxury for those who can afford it, Miss Faulkner." Beatrice felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her father had raised her on romantic novels and poetry. She had dreamed of love, of a passionate courtship, not a business arrangement with a man she'd never met. "Think on it," the widow advised, her tone gentler. "He's in town today, meeting with Mr. Coleman at the bank. If you're interested, you could introduce yourself." Later that afternoon, Beatrice found herself standing outside Coleman's bank, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain passers-by could hear it. She wore her only good dress, navy blue with a modest lace collar, now faded from too many washings. She saw him exit the bank, a tall man with broad shoulders and a serious demeanor. His clothes were of good quality but worn, his dark brown hair slightly too long beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, but carried himself with dignity. Beatrice had barely taken 2 steps toward him when a commotion from across the street caught their attention. A wagon's wheel had broken, sending barrels rolling across the dusty street. One barrel headed straight for a small child playing near the general store. Before anyone could react, Quentin Vance was moving faster than Beatrice would have thought possible for such a large man. He scooped the child up seconds before the barrel would have struck him, cradling the boy protectively against his chest as he sidestepped the danger. The mother rushed forward, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as Quentin handed the boy to her with a reassuring word and a gentle pat on the child's head. He refused her profuse thanks with a small shake of his head, turning away as if embarrassed by the attention. Something in that moment, the speed of his response, the gentleness with which he handled the child, gave Beatrice the courage to approach him. "Mr. Vance." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He turned, surprise evident in his face, a handsome face, she noted, though weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "Yes, madam. My name is Beatrice Faulkner. I understand you're seeking a wife." The words tumbled out before she could lose her nerve. His eyebrows rose, and for a terrible moment, she thought he might laugh at her. Instead, he removed his hat, revealing a streak of silver at his temple that belied his otherwise youthful appearance. "I am," he confirmed, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Though I didn't expect to discuss it on the street." "I apologize for the impropriety," she said quickly, "but my circumstances are urgent." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're staying at the Widow Jenkins' place?" "Yes, but only until tomorrow," he nodded, seeming to come to a decision. "I'll be direct, Miss Faulkner. I need a wife to help run my household and raise a family. I offer security, respect, and fair treatment. I don't offer romance or pretty words. If that sounds acceptable, I'd be willing to discuss terms." "Terms," she repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "Yes, what you bring to the marriage, what you expect from it." His voice was matter of fact. "I don't believe in surprises or misunderstandings between husband and wife." Beatrice swallowed hard. "I bring very little, Mr. Vance. My father died in debt. I have some education. I can read, write, and keep accounts. I know how to run a household economically." She paused, heat rising to her cheeks. "As for what I expect, I would ask for security as you offered, and kindness, and that you would never raise a hand to me, no matter the provocation." Something flashed in his eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "I would never strike a woman, Miss Faulkner. That is not up for negotiation." "Then we understand each other on that point," she said, relief washing through her. He studied her a moment longer. "Would you like to discuss this further over a meal? The hotel serves a decent stew." The offer of food reminded Beatrice that she hadn't eaten since the previous evening, having saved her last pennies for emergencies. That would be appreciated. Over a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread, they negotiated the terms of their potential marriage. Quentin was 32, a decade her senior. He had built his ranch from nothing, starting with 100 acres won in a poker game 12 years earlier. He had no family, none worth claiming, he amended with a hint of darkness that suggested a story he wasn't ready to tell. "The house is solid but plain," he explained. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a small parlor. I've been adding to it when I can spare the time from the cattle." "It sounds more than adequate," Beatrice assured him, thinking of the cramped room at the boarding house. "The work is hard, especially during roundup and branding," he continued. "I have 2 hands who help with the cattle, and a cook, old Pete, who won't take kindly to being replaced in the kitchen right away." "I wouldn't dream of it," she said quickly. "I'm happy to learn the ways of your household before making changes." He seemed pleased by this. "Most women who answered my advertisement had grander ideas about being the mistress of a ranch. They imagined parties and new dresses, not mending shirts and making soap. I have no illusions about ranch life, Mr. Vance. Hard work doesn't frighten me," he nodded, seemingly satisfied. "There's one more thing you should know." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "I'm not a warm man, Miss Faulkner. I won't mistreat you, but I can't promise tenderness or affection. My own upbringing was lacking in those areas." Beatrice felt a pang of sadness at his words. "I appreciate your honesty." "So," he said, "knowing all this, Are you still interested in becoming my wife?" Beatrice looked at him, really looked at him. He was offering her survival, nothing more. Yet there was an integrity about him that she respected, and hadn't she just witnessed his quick action to save that child? There was kindness in him, even if he didn't recognize it himself. "Yes, Mr. Vance," she said finally. "I am." They were married the next morning by the Justice of the Peace, with Widow Jenkins and the local barber serving as witnesses. Beatrice wore her navy dress again, and Quentin had a new white shirt beneath his dark coat. He placed a simple gold band on her finger, "Belonged to my mother," he explained briefly, and they signed the marriage certificate with steady hands. There was no celebration afterward. Quentin helped Beatrice collect her meager possessions from the boarding house, paid her outstanding bill despite her protests, and loaded everything onto his wagon. By noon, they were headed toward the Circle V Ranch, 15 miles outside of town. The journey passed mostly in silence. Beatrice, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had done, found herself unable to make conversation. Quentin seemed content with the quiet, occasionally pointing out landmarks or boundaries of his property once they crossed onto his land. "That's Butler Creek," he indicated, a narrow waterway lined with cottonwoods. "It runs through the property year-round, even in drought years. That's what makes this land valuable." Beatrice nodded, grateful for the small attempt at conversation. "It's beautiful country." "It can be harsh," he warned. "But yes, it has its beauty." As they crested a gentle rise, the ranch house came into view, a sturdy one-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch spanning the front. Smoke curled from the chimney, and several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a smokehouse. "It's larger than I expected," Beatrice commented. "Been adding to it over the years," Quentin explained. "Started with just 2 rooms. The original part is stone, the additions are timber." As they approached, a wiry older man with a shock of white hair emerged from what Beatrice assumed was the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "That's Pete," Quentin said. "Been with me since the beginning. He cooks, tends the garden, and generally keeps things running when I'm out with the herd." Pete watched their approach with undisguised curiosity. 2 other men, younger, with the lean, weathered look of cowboys, appeared from the direction of the barn. "The taller one is Samuel Durham, been here 3 years," Quentin continued his introductions. "The other is Micah Jones, joined us last spring." Beatrice smoothed her skirts nervously as Quentin brought the wagon to a halt. This was at her new home, her new life. These men were now her household. Quentin helped her down from the wagon, then turned to address the assembled men. "This is Mrs. Vance," he said simply. "My wife." The stunned expressions might have been comical under different circumstances. Pete recovered first, removing his hat and offering a slight bow. "Madam. Welcome to Circle V." "Thank you," Beatrice managed, forcing a smile. "I look forward to getting acquainted." Samuel and Micah mumbled their greetings, clearly unsure how to respond to this development. "Pete, Mrs. Vance will need help settling in," Quentin instructed. "Samuel, Micah, help with her things, then see to the horses." With that, he turned to Beatrice. "I need to check the north pasture before dark. Pete will show you around." Without waiting for a response, he strode toward the barn, leaving Beatrice standing alone with 3 strangers who seemed as uncomfortable as she felt. Pete cleared his throat. "Well, Mrs. Vance, let's get you inside then. Been a while since these walls have seen a woman's touch." As Pete led her into what was now her home, Beatrice fought against the panic rising in her chest. What had she done? Married a stranger who couldn't even stay long enough to show her to her room. But then she remembered the alternative: homelessness, starvation, or worse, and squared her shoulders. She had made her choice. Now she would make the best of it. The interior of the house was clean but Spartan. The front door opened directly into a sitting room furnished with a leather sofa, 2 chairs, and a small table. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a clock and an oil lamp. To the right was a dining area with a solid oak table that could seat 8, though only 4 chairs surrounded it. "Kitchen's through here," Pete said, leading her through a doorway. "My domain, mostly, but you're welcome to it." The kitchen was surprisingly well equipped with a large cast iron stove, a sink with a pump, and ample cabinet space. A door led to what Pete described as the summer kitchen, where cooking was done in hot weather to keep the main house cool. "Bedrooms are down this hall," he continued, pointing to a corridor off the sitting room. "Master's at the end that'll be yours and the boss's. Other one's empty now, though sometimes used for storage." Beatrice followed him to the master bedroom, her heart racing at the thought of sharing a room and a bed with a man she barely knew. The room was larger than expected, with a wide bed, a dresser, and a wardrobe. A colorful quilt covered the bed, the only decorative touch in the otherwise utilitarian space. "Bathrooms out back," Pete explained. "Got a proper outhouse and a bathhouse with a big tub. We heat water on Saturdays for bathing or special occasions." Beatrice nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "Thank you for showing me around, Pete." The old man studied her for a moment, his weathered face surprisingly kind. "Boss didn't give you much notice, did he? We were married this morning," she admitted. "It was rather sudden." Pete whistled low. "That explains the shock on the boys' faces." He hesitated, then added, "The boss is a good man, Mrs. Vance, not one for many words but fair and honest. You could do worse." "I believe that," Beatrice said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Pete nodded. "I'll let you get settled then. Supper's at 6 sharp. Boss likes punctuality." Left alone, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, her marriage bed, and allowed herself a moment of weakness. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help her situation. Instead, she began unpacking her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the empty drawers Quentin had apparently cleared for her use. At the bottom of her small trunk, wrapped in a piece of flannel, was her most treasured possession, her mother's silver hairbrush. Beatrice ran her fingers over the tarnished silver, remembering her mother's gentle hands brushing her hair before bed. Those memories were hazy now. Her mother had died when Beatrice was only 7, leaving her father to raise her alone. "I hope I've made the right choice, Mama," she whispered, placing the brush on the dresser, a small, personal touch in this unfamiliar room. By the time 6 o'clock approached, Beatrice had changed into her second dress. A simple brown calico washed her face and pinned her light brown hair into a neat bun. She wanted to make a good impression at her first meal with what was now, technically, her family. Quentin returned just before supper, his clothes dusty from riding. He paused in the doorway of the bedroom where Beatrice was putting the finishing touches on her hair. "You found everything you need?" he asked, his deep voice startling her. "Yes, thank you. Pete was very helpful." She turned to face him, noting the exhaustion in his eyes. "Is everything all right in the north pasture?" He looked mildly surprised that she had remembered where he'd gone. "Found a break in the fence. Fixed it for now, but I'll need to do a proper repair tomorrow." An awkward silence fell between them. Beatrice cast about for something to say. Should I wait while you wash up for supper?" "No need, I'll be quick." He hesitated, then added, "You look nice." Before she could respond to the unexpected compliment, he was gone, presumably to wash the trail dust from his hands and face. Supper was a quiet affair. Pete had prepared a hearty meal of chicken, potatoes and green beans, with apple pie for dessert. The cowboys ate quickly, making stilted conversation about cattle and weather, clearly uncomfortable with a woman at the table. Quentin said little, though he ensured Beatrice was served first and had everything she needed. After the meal, Samuel and Micah excused themselves to the bunkhouse. Pete began clearing the dishes, waving away Beatrice's offer to help. "Not tonight, Mrs. Vance. You get settled in. Plenty of time for work tomorrow." Left alone with her husband, Beatrice felt the awkwardness return tenfold. They sat at the table, neither speaking, until Quentin finally broke the silence. "I usually read for a while in the evening," he said. "There are books in the sitting room if you'd like." Relief washed over her at this unexpected glimpse of compatibility. "I love to read." My father always encouraged it. Something like approval flickered in Quentin's eyes. He led her to a bookshelf in the sitting room that Beatrice hadn't noticed earlier, hidden in a corner behind one of the chairs. The shelves held an impressive collection classics like Shakespeare and Dickens, history volumes, and even some poetry. "My mother was a school teacher," he explained, seeing her surprise. "These were hers. I've added to the collection over the years when I can." Beatrice ran her fingers along the spines, touched by this unexpected connection. "May I?" she asked, pulling out a volume of Tennyson. "They're yours now, too," he reminded her, the hint of a smile softening his features. They read in companionable silence for over an hour, Beatrice with her poetry and Quentin with a history of the Texas frontier. The domesticity of the scene gave Beatrice hope that perhaps this arrangement might work after all. As the clock struck 9, Quentin closed his book. "I rise early," he said. "We should retire." Reality crashed back upon Beatrice. This was still her wedding night, and she was still expected to perform a wife's duties. She set aside her book with trembling hands, following Quentin to the bedroom. He must have sensed her fear, for when they reached the bedroom he turned to her with an unexpectedly gentle expression. "I won't touch you tonight," he said quietly. "You need time to adjust." Relief and confusion warred within her. "But our arrangement—" "Our arrangement is for a marriage," he said firmly. "Not for me to force myself on a frightened woman. There's time enough for that part when you're ready." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes, this time from gratitude. "Thank you," he nodded awkwardly. "I'll step out while you change. There are nightgowns in the bottom drawer. They belong to my mother. They might be large, but they're clean." True to his word, Quentin gave her privacy to change and prepare for bed. When he returned, he had removed his boots and outer shirt but remained otherwise dressed in his trousers and undershirt. He lay on his side of the bed, careful not to touch her, and extinguished the lamp. "Good night, Mrs. Vance," he said formally. "Good night, Mr. Vance," she replied, wondering if they would ever reach a point where they used each other's given names. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Beatrice. She lay rigid in the darkness, acutely aware of the man beside her. His breathing eventually deepened, telling her he had fallen asleep. Only then did she allow herself to relax slightly, turning to study his profile in the moonlight filtering through the window. In sleep, the hardness left his features. She could see now that he was handsome in a rugged way, with strong cheekbones and a firm jaw softened by surprisingly full lips. A small scar near his right temple made her wonder about its origin. There were stories written in his face that she didn't yet know. "Who are you, Quentin Vance?" she whispered, too softly to wake him. "And what kind of man have I married?" The answers would come with time. For now she was safe, with a roof over her head and food in her belly, more than she could have hoped for just days ago. As sleep finally claimed her, Beatrice's last thought was that perhaps desperation had led her not to disaster, but to an unexpected sanctuary. Beatrice woke to an empty bed and the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window, indicating she had slept later than usual. Mortified at oversleeping on her first morning as mistress of the house, she hurriedly dressed in her work skirt and a simple blouse, pinning her hair in a practical bun. In the kitchen, she found Pete at the stove frying bacon. He turned at her entrance, offering a gruff good morning. "The men have already eaten and gone out," he informed her. "Boss said to let you sleep." "That was considerate," Beatrice said, surprised, "but I should have been up." "There's work to be done," Pete chuckled, sliding a plate of bacon and eggs in front of her. "Plenty of time for that. Eat first." As she ate, Pete explained the routine of the ranch. "Boss and the boys are moving cattle to the south pasture today. They'll be back for dinner at noon." Afternoons, the boss usually works on whatever needs fixing: fences, buildings, equipment. Supper's at 6, like yesterday. "And what are your duties besides cooking?" Beatrice asked, genuinely curious about how the household functioned. "Garden needs tending, got vegetables and herbs out back. Chickens need feeding. Laundry's done Mondays in the wash house, that's tomorrow. Might be a good place for you to start getting your bearings." Beatrice nodded, already planning how to make herself useful. "I'd like to see the garden after breakfast, if you wouldn't mind showing me." The morning passed quickly as Pete introduced her to the workings of the ranch house. The vegetable garden was impressive, with neat rows of spring plantings just beginning to sprout. The chicken coop housed a dozen healthy hens that provided more than enough eggs for the household. The wash house was well equipped with 2 large tubs, a wringer, and clothesline strung between posts. "Boss built all this," Pete explained, gesturing around the well-organized compound. "Said if he was going to live out here, might as well be comfortable. He seems very capable," Beatrice observed. Pete snorted. "Stubborn as they come. Won't ask for help until he's bleeding half to death. Had to threaten to quit last winter when he caught pneumonia and still tried to check the herd in a snowstorm." The image of Quentin pushing himself beyond reasonable limits didn't surprise Beatrice. She had already sensed that determination in him, but it troubled her to think of him risking his health unnecessarily. At noon, the men returned as predicted. Quentin entered the kitchen as Beatrice was helping Pete set the table, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her domestic activity. "You slept well?" he asked, washing his hands at the pump. "Yes, thank you," she replied, feeling oddly shy in the daylight. "Pete has been showing me around the property." Quentin nodded. "Good, you should know where everything is." He paused, then added awkwardly, "This is your home now." The simple statement touched something in Beatrice. A home of her own, something she had feared lost forever after her father's death. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll do my best to care for it properly." Something flickered in his eyes, approval perhaps, or relief. "I know you will." The noon meal was less tense than supper had been the previous night. Samuel and Micah seemed to have adjusted somewhat to Beatrice's presence, even including her in their conversation about a new foal born in the barn that morning. "You should see her, Mrs. Vance," Micah enthused, his youthful face animated. "Pretty little filly with a white star on her forehead." "I'd like that," Beatrice said honestly. She had always loved horses, though her family had never been able to afford one. "I'll show you after lunch," Quentin offered unexpectedly. "Need to check on her anyway." True to his word, after the meal was cleared, Quentin led Beatrice to the barn. The building was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with stalls for 8 horses, storage for hay and feed, and a tack room at the far end. "Here she is," Quentin said, stopping at a stall where a chestnut mare stood protectively over a wobbly-legged foal. "Born just before dawn." Beatrice approached the stall carefully, not wanting to disturb the new mother. The foal was indeed beautiful, with slender legs that seemed too long for its body and a perfectly placed star between its intelligent eyes. "She's wonderful," Beatrice breathed, captivated by the new life. "She'll be a good cutting horse when she's grown," Quentin predicted, a note of pride in his voice. "Her dam is one of our best." Beatrice glanced at him, struck by the softness in his expression as he gazed at the mare and foal. This man who presented such a hard exterior to the world clearly had a gentler side he kept carefully hidden. "You name your horses?" she asked. "The working stock, no. But the breeding mares, yes." He patted the mother horse's neck. "This is Penny for her color. And the foal." He looked at her with surprise, as if it hadn't occurred to him to name the newborn yet. "I don't know. What would you suggest?" Beatrice studied the filly thoughtfully. "Aurora," she said finally, "for the dawn when she was born." A smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him, briefly transformed Quentin's face, softening the hard lines and lighting his gray eyes. "Aurora it is, then." The moment passed quickly, but it left Beatrice with a fluttering sensation in her chest that she wasn't entirely prepared for. This man was still a stranger in many ways, yet something about that brief smile made her want to know him better. As they walked back to the house, Quentin cleared his throat. "I need to ride out to check the fence line this afternoon. Would you like to come? Might be good for you to see more of the property." The invitation surprised her. "I'd like that very much, but I don't have a horse." "You can ride Molly," he said. "She's gentle, good for beginners. Pete mentioned you haven't had much experience with horses." "Is there anything Pete hasn't told you about me?" Beatrice asked, half joking, half serious. Quentin's expression turned serious. "He's looking out for you, for both of us. Wants this arrangement to work." "And you, do you want it to work?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I wouldn't have married you otherwise, Mrs. Vance. I don't make commitments lightly." The intensity of his gaze made her pulse quicken. "Neither do I," she assured him. "And perhaps you could call me Beatrice. When we're alone, at least." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Beatrice," he said, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "And you should call me Quentin." It was a small step, but it felt significant, a first tentative move toward genuine familiarity. An hour later, Beatrice found herself atop a placid brown mare, following Quentin along the eastern boundary of the ranch. She wore a borrowed pair of denim trousers under her skirt for safety. Quentin had insisted, though the impropriety made her blush, and Quentin's spare hat to shield her face from the sun. The landscape was more varied than she'd expected, with rolling hills giving way to stands of oak and mesquite trees, then opening into grassy pastures where cattle grazed in small groups. A creek cut through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows that provided welcome shade. "It's beautiful," she commented as they paused to let the horses drink at the creek. "Much more green than I expected." "We're fortunate," Quentin acknowledged. "The creek never runs dry, even in drought years. Makes this land valuable." He pointed to a distant hill. "Property extends to that ridge line. Beyond that is the Taylor spread." "Are they good neighbors?" A shadow crossed his face. "We have an understanding. They keep to their side, I keep to mine." The curt response suggested there was more to the story, but Beatrice didn't press. Instead, she asked about the cattle, the seasonal work of the ranch, the plans for expansion, safe topics that allowed Quentin to share his knowledge without revealing too much of himself. As they rode, she noticed how he constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any sign of trouble or change. Nothing escaped his attention: a broken branch that might indicate trespassers, fresh tracks that told him deer had passed recently, the behavior of birds that suggested a storm might be brewing despite the clear sky. "You read the land well," she observed. "Have to out here," he replied. Land tells you what you need to know if you listen. At the eastern fence line, they dismounted to inspect a section that had been recently repaired. Quentin explained the technique as he checked his work, showing Beatrice how to spot weaknesses in the wire and posts. Cattle are escape artists, he told her, his tone lighter than usual. They'll find the one weak spot in a mile of fence. Like children testing boundaries, Beatrice suggested, remembering her students from the brief period she'd helped at the town school before her father's illness had required her full attention. Quentin looked at her with surprise. You have experience with children. I taught school for a time, she explained, just as an assistant, but I enjoyed it. He absorbed this information, nodding slowly. You mentioned you can read and write. I didn't realize you had formal training. My father believed in education for both men and women, she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. He said knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. Your father was a wise man, Quentin said simply, and Beatrice felt a rush of gratitude that he didn't dismiss her education as impractical or unnecessary, as many men might have. They remounted and continued their circuit of the property, Quentin pointing out landmarks and explaining the history of certain features, a lightning-struck oak, where he'd once taken shelter during a storm, a natural spring that attracted wildlife, the remains of an old trapper's cabin that predated his ownership. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beatrice was sore from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but exhilarated by the experience. As Quentin helped her dismount, his hands firm around her waist, she found herself standing closer to him than at any time since their brief ceremony. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something electric passed between them, not quite attraction, not yet, but a recognition of possibility. The moment broke when Samuel approached from the barn, calling out a question about the next day's work. Quentin stepped back, his expression shuddering once more into its habitual reserve. That night at supper, however, Beatrice noticed subtle differences in his behavior. He passed dishes to her with a quiet Beatrice instead of Mrs. Vance. He asked her opinion about planting tomatoes in the garden, and when Pete mentioned needing supplies from town, Quentin suggested that Beatrice might want to accompany him on the trip later in the week. You might need things for yourself, he explained, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. Women's things. The awkward consideration touched her more than an elaborate gesture might have. Thank you, I would appreciate that. After supper, they again read together in the sitting room, but this time Quentin occasionally commented on passages from his book or asked Beatrice about her poetry. Small steps toward conversation, toward knowing each other as people rather than contractual partners. When they retired to bed, the awkwardness of the previous night returned, but somewhat diminished. Quentin again gave her privacy to change and maintained a respectful distance when they lay down. Good night, Beatrice, he said quietly. Good night, Quentin, she replied, the use of his first name still feeling new and significant on her tongue. As she drifted toward sleep, Beatrice realized that for the first time since her father's death, she hadn't spent the day consumed by fear and uncertainty. The routine of the ranch, the physical work, the simple interaction with Quentin and the others had occupied her mind completely. If not happiness, she had at least found purpose in this strange new life. The week fell into a pattern. Each day, Beatrice rose early, helping Pete with breakfast and learning the rhythms of the household. Mornings were spent on domestic tasks. Monday was laundry day, Tuesday for baking bread and pies, Wednesday for mending and sewing. Afternoons, she often accompanied Quentin on his rounds of the property. gradually becoming more comfortable on horseback and more familiar with the vast acreage that was now her home. Evenings were quiet, with meals followed by reading or sometimes checkers, which Quentin played with surprising competitiveness. Their conversations grew incrementally longer, though Quentin remained reserved about his past. Nights continued to be chaste, though Beatrice sometimes woke to find herself closer to him than when they'd fallen asleep, drawn unconsciously to his warmth in the cool spring nights. On Thursday, as promised, Quentin took Beatrice to town for supplies. The trip was Beatrice's first return to Desdemona since her wedding, and she felt oddly nervous as they approached the familiar buildings. "Is something wrong?" Quentin asked, noticing her tension. "Just strange to be back," she admitted. "Everything looks the same, but I feel different." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You are different. You're Mrs. Vance now." The simple statement carried more weight than he perhaps intended. She was indeed Mrs. Vance, wife of a prosperous rancher, no longer the destitute daughter of a failed merchant. The change in status would be immediately apparent to everyone in town. As they pulled up in front of the general store, Beatrice became acutely aware of curious eyes watching from windows and doorways. News traveled fast in small towns, and her sudden marriage to Quentin Vance would have been the subject of much speculation. Quentin seemed oblivious to the attention as he helped her down from the wagon. "I need to speak with Coleman at the bank," he told her. "Will you be all right selecting the supplies? Pete made a list." "Of course," Beatrice assured him, grateful for a task to focus on. Inside the store, Mr. Patterson greeted her with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Vance, is it now? Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Mr. Patterson," Beatrice replied politely, presenting Pete's list of needed supplies. As the shopkeeper gathered the items, the bell over the door jingled, announcing the arrival of 3 women. Beatrice recognized Mrs. Wilson, the minister's wife, Mrs. Cooper, who ran the millinery shop, and Miss Abigail Stone, the town's most notorious gossip. "Beatrice Faulkner," Miss Stone exclaimed, as if surprised to find her there. "Or should I say Mrs. Vance? What a whirlwind courtship that must have been. One day you're destitute, the next you're married to one of the county's largest landowners." The insinuation was clear, and Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. Before she could formulate a response, another voice spoke from the doorway. "Mrs. Vance had the good sense to recognize a fair offer when she heard one," Quentin said, his deep voice carrying easily in the suddenly silent store. "And I had the good fortune that she accepted." He moved to stand beside Beatrice, his presence solid and reassuring. "Are you finished with your shopping, my dear? We should get back before dark." The endearment never before used caught Beatrice by surprise, but she recovered quickly. "Almost. Mr. Patterson is just finishing our order." The 3 women murmured hasty congratulations and moved away, clearly disappointed that their attempt to embarrass Beatrice had been thwarted. Quentin remained at her side as they completed their transaction, his hand occasionally resting lightly at the small of her back, a public display of unity that was new but not unwelcome. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Beatrice noticed a small package among the items that hadn't been on Pete's list, a tin of lemon drops, her favorite candy. She looked at Quentin questioningly. "Saw you looking at them," he explained with a shrug. "Thought you might enjoy them." The simple gesture, noticing something she liked and quietly providing it without fanfare, touched Beatrice deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was very thoughtful." He nodded, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "The bank approved the loan for the new breeding stock," he said, changing the subject. "They'll arrive next month." But Beatrice wasn't ready to let the moment pass. "You didn't have to defend me in there," she said, "but I'm glad you did." Quentin's expression hardened. "You're my wife." Their implications were disrespectful to both of us. "Still, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "The my dear was a nice touch." To her surprise, a faint smile touched his lips. Seemed appropriate for the audience. As they drove home, Beatrice felt a subtle shift in their relationship. Quentin had publicly claimed her as his wife, defended her honor, and shown small but meaningful considerations for her comfort and happiness. They were still virtual strangers in many ways, their marriage still a practical arrangement, but the foundation for something more substantial was beginning to form. That night, as they prepared for bed, Beatrice gathered her courage to address the unspoken aspect of their marriage. "Quentin," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "we haven't discussed certain expectations of marriage." He went very still, his back to her as he hung his shirt on a peg. "No, we haven't." "I know you said you would wait until I was ready," she continued, forcing the words past her nervousness. "It's been a week now. I wouldn't object if you wanted to, if you felt it was time to." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Are you saying this because you want it or because you think it's your duty?" The directness of the question flustered her. Both perhaps. I mean, it is my duty as your wife, but also." "Also," he prompted when she faltered. Beatrice took a deep breath. "Also, I'm beginning to know you. To respect you. I think perhaps we could find comfort in each other." Quentin crossed the room slowly, stopping within arm's reach of her. "Beatrice," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I don't want your sense of obligation. When we share a bed fully, I want it to be because you desire it, not because you think you owe it to me." The distinction stunned her. Most men would have accepted her offer without question, pleased to claim their marital rights regardless of her motivation. That Quentin refused on principle spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she whispered. Unsure what else to say, he nodded, maintaining the distance between them. "We have time, Beatrice. No need to rush." That night, however, when they lay in bed, Beatrice found herself more aware than ever of his proximity. The conversation had changed something between them, acknowledging desires that had remained unspoken. Though he didn't touch her, she felt his awareness of her matching her own consciousness of him, creating a tension that was both unsettling and exciting. As April turned to May, life on the Circle V settled into a rhythm. Beatrice gradually took on more responsibility in the household, making small improvements that the men seemed to appreciate: curtains for the bare windows, flowers on the table, a better system for organizing the pantry. She also discovered unexpected pleasure in ranch life. She learned to ride with increasing confidence, to identify the different plants and wildlife of the region, to anticipate the changing weather patterns that were so crucial to the cattle operation. The physical work kept her busy during the day, and the quiet evenings with Quentin became something she looked forward to rather than endured. Quentin, too, seemed to be adapting to married life. He made efforts to include Beatrice in ranch decisions, explaining his reasoning and sometimes asking her opinion. He brought her small gifts from his rides around the property: interesting rocks, a bird's nest fallen from a tree, wildflowers in spring bloom. And he began to share bits of his past, one careful piece at a time. "My father was a hard man," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Believed the only way to raise a son was with the back of his hand and the buckle of his belt." Beatrice's heart ached at the matter-of-fact way he described such cruelty. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged. "Made me determined to be different, to build something better than what he left behind." "Is he still alive?" she asked carefully. "No. Died in a bar fight when I was 16. Mother followed a year later, consumption." His voice held no emotion, just a statement of facts. left me nothing but debts and bad memories. Yet you kept your mother's books, her hairbrush." He glanced at her, surprised that she'd made the connection. She did her best. Wasn't strong enough to stand up to him, but she taught me to read, to think, gave me what tools she could. The conversation marked a turning point. Gradually, Quentin revealed more of himself, how he'd worked as a cowhand on various ranches, saving every penny. How he'd won his first 100 acres in a poker game against a man too drunk to know the value of what he was wagering. How he'd slowly built his herd and his land holdings through stubborn persistence and calculated risk. In turn, Beatrice shared her own history, her happy early childhood before her mother's death, her father's dedication to her education despite their modest circumstances, her brief career as a teacher's assistant, and the slow decline of their fortunes as her father's health failed. "He was a dreamer," she explained, "always certain the next shipment would bring prosperity, but he wasn't practical enough for business." "You loved him," Quentin observed. "That's what matters." As they grew to know each other better, the physical tension between them also increased. Their good-night touches lingered longer. Occasionally, Beatrice would catch Quentin watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And increasingly, she found herself studying him when he wasn't aware, the strength in his shoulders as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands as he tended a newborn calf, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. One evening in late May, a thunderstorm rolled across the ranch, bringing much-needed rain but also violent wind and lightning. Beatrice stood at the window, watching the spectacle of nature's fury, when a particularly close lightning strike illuminated the yard, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. Before she could recover, Quentin was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Just thunder," he said gently. "Storms passing over us." "I know," she said, embarrassed by her reaction. "I've just never liked storms." Another lightning flash, another crash of thunder. This time, Beatrice flinched toward Quentin rather than away. His arm slipped around her shoulders, a tentative comfort that became more certain when she didn't pull away. They stood together at the window, watching the storm's progress across the land. Quentin's warmth beside her made the fearsome display seem less threatening, almost beautiful in its raw power. "Rain's good," he said after a while. "Grass will grow strong for the cattle. And the garden," Beatrice added. "The tomatoes needed this." It was such a domestic conversation, husband and wife, discussing the benefits of rain for their livelihood, yet it felt significant. They were building something together, this life on the Circle V. As the storm began to move away, the thunder more distant, Quentin's arm remained around her shoulders. Beatrice turned slightly toward him, looking up to thank him for the comfort. The words died on her lips as she found him already looking down at her, his gray eyes dark in the dim light. Later, Beatrice couldn't have said who moved first, only that suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded. His arms encircled her fully, drawing her against him as the kiss deepened. Beatrice's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, feeling the warmth of his skin, the rapid beat of his pulse. When they finally separated, both breathing harder, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted, his voice rough. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her own voice barely above a whisper, "waiting for you to be ready, to be sure." Beatrice's heart swelled at his consideration. "I'm sure now," she told him, reaching up to touch his face. "Very sure." That night their marriage was finally consummated in full. Quentin was patient and gentle, guiding Beatrice through the initial discomfort to unexpected pleasure. Afterward, as she lay in his arms, Beatrice marveled at how far they had come from the awkward strangers who had exchanged vows barely a month earlier. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to find happiness in a marriage of convenience," she answered honestly. He propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "Are you happy then? Truly?" The vulnerability in the question touched her deeply. "Yes," she assured him. "Happier than I thought possible after my father died." He nodded, satisfaction and something that looked remarkably like joy lighting his eyes. "Good, that's good." As spring gave way to the heat of a Texas summer, Beatrice and Quentin's relationship continued to deepen. Their physical intimacy brought a new dimension to their marriage, but equally important was the growing emotional bond between them. They had moved from practical partners to friends to lovers, each transition building on the foundation of mutual respect they had established from the beginning. June brought the arrival of the new breeding stock. Quentin had purchased 3 bulls and 5 heifers of exceptional quality that represented a significant investment in the ranch's future. Beatrice stood beside him as the animals were unloaded from the transport wagons, understanding now why this purchase mattered so much. It wasn't just about expanding the herd, it was about improving its quality, ensuring the Circle V's prosperity for years to come. "They're magnificent," she said, admiring the powerful animals. "Worth every penny," Quentin agreed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "In 3 years our calves will fetch top prices at market." "Our calves," Beatrice repeated, struck by the casual inclusion. This was their future he was building, not just his own. Quentin looked at her, seeming to realize the significance of his words. "Yes," he said deliberately. "Ours." That evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air after a hot day, Beatrice found herself contemplating the strange path that had brought her to this place, this life, this man. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Quentin asked, noting her expression. "How different my life would be if the bank hadn't foreclosed on my father's store," she answered truthfully. "I was so desperate then, so afraid. And now—" His voice was carefully neutral. Beatrice turned to look at him directly. "Now I'm grateful," she said simply. "Not for my father's death or the hardships that followed, but for where they led me. To you. To us." Quentin reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they enfolded hers. "When I placed that advertisement for a wife, I expected practicality, maybe respect if I was fortunate. I never expected." He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. "What?" Beatrice prompted softly. "Happiness," he finished finally. "I never expected to be happy." The admission, so vulnerable, so honest, moved Beatrice deeply. She leaned toward him, pressing a kiss to his lips that conveyed all the emotion she felt. "I love you, Quentin Vance," she whispered against his mouth, saying the words for the first time. "Not because you saved me from destitution, but because of the man you are." His arms tightened around her, his response a kiss of such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. When he finally drew back, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you too, Beatrice," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible." The confession marked another milestone in their journey, from marriage of convenience to a union of true love and partnership. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Beatrice marveled at how hope had blossomed from desperation, and how the future that had once seemed so bleak now stretched before them, full of promise. In July, a letter arrived from Widow Jenkins, requesting Beatrice's assistance with a charity bazaar in town. "The Ladies' Auxiliary is raising funds for a new school building," the widow wrote. "We hoped you might contribute some of your excellent preserves or baked goods for the sale." Beatrice was touched by the inclusion, having feared that her hasty marriage had cut her off from the community. Quentin encouraged her participation. "Take whatever you need from the garden," he offered. "Pete says your strawberry preserves are the best he's tasted." The bazaar was scheduled for the last Saturday in July. Beatrice spent the preceding days preparing canning jars of strawberry and peach preserves, baking loaves of her specialty cinnamon bread, and sewing a quilt from scraps of fabric she'd been saving. On the morning of the bazaar, Quentin surprised her by announcing he would accompany her to town. "Need to speak with Coleman about some business," he explained, though Beatrice suspected he wanted to ensure she wasn't subjected to unkind gossip again. The town square had been transformed for the occasion, with tables and booths displaying everything from handcrafted furniture to home-baked goods. Beatrice's table, shared with Mrs. Wilson, quickly became popular for the quality of her preserves and bread. "You've settled into ranch life well," Mrs. Wilson observed as they arranged their goods. "Marriage agrees with you." "It does," Beatrice agreed, unable to suppress a smile as she caught sight of Quentin across the square, deep in conversation with the blacksmith. "I'll admit, many of us were concerned when we heard about your hasty wedding," the minister's wife continued in a lowered voice. "But Mr. Vance has proven to be a good husband, it seems." "The best," Beatrice said simply. Throughout the day, Beatrice was approached by various townspeople, some genuinely friendly, others clearly curious about her unconventional marriage. To her surprise, most seemed to have accepted the union, particularly as they observed the obvious respect and growing affection between Beatrice and Quentin. By mid-afternoon, Beatrice's preserves had sold out, and her quilt had fetched a handsome price at auction. As she was packing up her empty jars, she noticed a commotion near the saloon across the street. A group of cowboys, apparently well into their cups despite the early hour, had spilled onto the boardwalk. Among them was a tall, sandy-haired man whose voice carried above the others. "That's Taylor's oldest boy, Roy," Mrs. Wilson explained, noticing Beatrice's attention. "Always causing trouble when he comes to town." The name caught Beatrice's interest. Taylor, as in the neighboring ranch to Circle V, the same. Bad blood between those families for years, though no one remembers exactly how it started. As if drawn by their conversation, Roy Taylor's gaze swept across the square, coming to rest on Beatrice. His eyes narrowed, then shifted to where Quentin stood nearby. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Well, if it isn't Vance," he called, his voice deliberately carrying. "Heard you finally found yourself a woman. Had to get one desperate enough to take you, I hear." Beatrice felt Quentin stiffen beside her, his posture taut with controlled anger. Around them, conversations halted as townspeople sensed the potential for conflict. "Taylor," Quentin acknowledged coldly, "didn't expect to see you in civilized company." Roy pushed away from his companions, swaggering toward them. "Just wanted to meet the little lady who settled for second best," he said, tipping his hat mockingly toward Beatrice. "Madam, when you tire of playing rancher's wife, the Taylor spread is always open to visitors." The crude implication hung in the air. Before Quentin could respond, Beatrice stepped forward, her chin raised. "Mr. Taylor," she said clearly, "I assure you I've married the finest man in the county, and while I appreciate your concern for my happiness, I can promise you I have no need of alternatives." A ripple of surprised laughter passed through the onlookers. Roy's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. "Taught her to fight your battles for you, Vance," he sneered. "My wife speaks for herself," Quentin replied evenly, "and she's made her position clear. I suggest you return to your drinking before you say something you'll regret." For a tense moment, It seemed Roy might pursue the confrontation. Then Sheriff Davis appeared at the edge of the crowd. "Problem here, folks?" he asked mildly, though his hand rested meaningfully on his holster. "No problem," Roy muttered, backing away. "Just welcoming the newest member of our community." As Taylor and his companions retreated to the saloon, Beatrice released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Quentin's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. "You handled that well," he murmured. "I merely spoke the truth," she replied, returning the pressure of his fingers. "Though I gather there's history between your families I should know about." Quentin nodded grimly. "Tonight, I'll explain tonight." The rest of the bazaar passed without incident. As they drove home in the late afternoon, Beatrice could sense Quentin's preoccupation with the confrontation. "Are you angry that I spoke up?" she finally asked. He looked at her in surprise. "Angry? No. Proud, actually." Most women would have retreated behind their husbands. "I'm not most women," she reminded him. A smile touched his lips. "No, you're certainly not, and I'm grateful for it." That evening, after supper, Quentin finally explained the long-standing feud with the Taylor family. "It started with a water rights dispute 15 years ago, before I even owned Circle V," he told her as they sat on the porch swing. "Old Man Taylor dammed a creek that fed both properties, diverting all the water to his land during a drought year. The previous owner of Circle V confronted him. Guns were drawn, and Taylor's younger brother was killed." "That's terrible," Beatrice said softly. Quentin nodded. "The Taylor family never forgave or forgot. When I bought this place, I tried to make peace, offered to share water rights, establish clear boundaries. But Roy, especially, seems determined to keep the hatred alive." "Is he dangerous?" Beatrice asked, concern evident in her voice. "Mostly talk," Quentin assured her. "But yes, he could be dangerous if pushed. That's why I've maintained a policy of minimal contact. We stay on our land, they stay on theirs." Beatrice absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Thank you for telling me. I should know about potential enemies." "I should have told you sooner," Quentin admitted. "But I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. The Taylors generally keep their distance." "Except when they're drunk in town," Beatrice observed wryly. Quentin's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Except then." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Beatrice felt a deepening of their connection. Quentin was sharing not just the daily concerns of the ranch, but the more complex aspects of his life, the feuds, the history, the potential dangers. He was treating her as a true partner, not just a wife in name. August brought scorching heat that tested everyone's endurance. The cattle sought whatever shade they could find, the creek ran low, and daily chores became exercises in perseverance. Beatrice learned to rise before dawn, to complete the most strenuous household tasks before the worst heat of the day, and to time her gardening for the relative cool of early evening. Despite the challenges, she found unexpected joy in the rhythm of ranch life. The garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The chickens produced eggs in abundance. And each evening, regardless of the day's difficulties, she and Quentin found comfort and pleasure in each other's company. One particularly hot afternoon, Quentin suggested they ride to a secluded spot on the creek where a deep pool had formed beneath a stand of cottonwoods. "Best swimming hole on the property," he told her with a rare grin. "Been meaning to show it to you." They rode out after the midday meal, carrying a small picnic basket with cold chicken and lemonade that Pete had prepared. The spot was indeed beautiful, a clear pool at least 8 feet deep, surrounded by smooth rocks and shaded by ancient trees. "It's perfect," Beatrice breathed, already feeling cooler in the shade. "Wait until you're in the water," Quentin promised, already removing his boots and socks. He looked at her with sudden uncertainty. "You do know how to swim," Beatrice nodded. "My father taught me in the river near our old home, though it's been years." "The pool's safe," he assured her. "No current to speak of." A moment of awkwardness followed as they both realized the impropriety of swimming together. Even as husband and wife, such an activity wasn't exactly conventional. "I'll turn my back while you get in," Quentin offered, ever considerate of her modesty. "You can keep your chemise on, it'll dry quickly in this heat." Grateful for his understanding, Beatrice stepped behind a large boulder to remove her outer clothing, leaving only her thin cotton chemise. The fabric immediately became transparent when wet, but the privacy of the location and Quentin's consideration eased her embarrassment. The water was wonderfully cool against her overheated skin. Beatrice waded in carefully, remembering her father's swimming lessons from long ago. By the time the water reached her waist, confidence had returned, and she pushed off from the bottom to float on her back. "You can turn around now," she called to Quentin, who had been patiently facing away. He had stripped down to his undershorts, his broad chest and strong arms bare in the dappled sunlight. Beatrice had seen him undressed in the privacy of their bedroom, but something about seeing him this way in the open air, water droplets glistening on his tanned skin, made her breath catch. He dove into the water with practiced ease, surfacing near her with a grin that made him look years younger. "Better than a hot house, isn't it?" "Much better," she agreed, returning his smile. They swam lazily in the cool water, occasionally splashing each other like children, their laughter echoing off the rocks. The heat, the ranch work, the lingering tension from the encounter with Roy Taylor all receded in this private paradise. After their swim, they spread a blanket in a patch of shade and enjoyed their picnic, talking easily about everything and nothing. With her hair drying in loose waves around her shoulders and her skin cooled by the swim, Beatrice felt more relaxed than she had in weeks. "We should do this more often," she suggested, lying back on the blanket to look up at the patterns of leaves against the blue sky. "We will," Quentin promised, stretching out beside her. He propped himself on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. "You're beautiful, Beatrice." The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, touched her deeply. "So are you," she replied softly, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Their lovemaking that afternoon was unhurried and sweet, a celebration of the love that had grown between them over the past months. Afterward, they lay together in contented silence, listening to the gentle sounds of water and rustling leaves. "I never thought I could be this happy," Quentin admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never thought I deserved it." Beatrice turned to face him, struck by the vulnerability in his confession. "Of course you deserve happiness," she said firmly. "Everyone does." He shook his head slightly. "My father always said I was worthless, said it so often I started to believe him." "He was wrong," Beatrice stated with absolute conviction. "You are the most honorable, hard-working, decent man I've ever known. I thank God every day that I found you or that you found me." Quentin's eyes darkened with emotion. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "More than I can say." As summer began to wane, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She said nothing to Quentin at first, wanting to be certain before raising hopes or concerns. But as August turned to September and the telltale morning sickness began, she could no longer deny the truth. She was with child. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and trepidation. A baby had always been part of their arrangement, the next generation for the Circle V. But now that it was a reality, Beatrice found herself worrying about the practicalities. The ranch was 15 miles from town, and the nearest doctor, Winter, would come before the baby did, potentially making travel difficult. And while she had helped deliver Mrs. Wilson's baby during her brief teaching stint, Beatrice had no experience with childbirth herself. One evening in mid-September, as they sat on the porch after supper, Beatrice gathered her courage to share the news. "Quentin," she began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I have something to tell you." He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "Not exactly." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, in the spring, I think. April, perhaps." For a moment, Quentin seemed unable to process her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, awe in his voice. "Our baby." He reached for her, drawing her gently into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious beyond measure. "Are you certain?" She nodded against his chest. "Reasonably so. I've missed my courses twice now, and I've been feeling ill in the mornings." His hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat abdomen. "Our child," he whispered, wonder evident in his tone. "Beatrice, this is— I don't have words." "You're happy then?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He drew back to look into her eyes. "Are you— happy, I mean?" "Yes," she assured him, her own joy bubbling up now that she had shared the news. "A little frightened, perhaps, but mostly happy." "Frightened? Why?" His brow furrowed with concern. Beatrice explained her practical worries: the distance from medical care, the timing with Winter, her inexperience. Quentin listened seriously, nodding his understanding. "We'll make arrangements," he promised. "Pete's sister was a midwife for years. She lives in Ranger now, not too far. I'll speak to her about attending you when the time comes, and I'll make sure the road to town is always clear, no matter how much snow we get." His immediate focus on solutions rather than platitudes reassured Beatrice. This was the Quentin she had come to love: practical, protective, determined to provide for his family's needs. "Thank you," she said, leaning against him contentedly. "I feel better already." They sat together as twilight deepened into night, making plans for the child they had created. Quentin spoke of adding a nursery to the house, of teaching their son or daughter to ride, of passing on the legacy they were building together. "I never had a real family," he confessed. "Never knew what it was to feel safe or valued as a child. But our baby will know those things, Beatrice. I promise you that. Our child will be loved," she agreed softly. "So very loved." The news of the pregnancy seemed to energize Quentin. He threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness, beginning work on a nursery addition to the house, and making improvements to the road that connected the ranch to town. He also sought out Pete's sister, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, securing her promise to attend Beatrice during the birth. Eleanor delivered half the children in Palo Pinto County before she retired, Pete assured them. "Better than any doctor, if you ask me." The ranch hands, too, seemed pleased by the news, offering awkward congratulations and suddenly treating Beatrice with even greater deference. Samuel insisted on carrying water from the pump, so she wouldn't have to lift the heavy buckets, while Micah brought her wildflowers he found during his rides around the property. As her body changed with the growing child, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Just 6 months earlier, she had been destitute and desperate, with no hope for the future. Now she was the beloved wife of a good man, mistress of a prosperous ranch, and expecting a child who would be welcomed into a home filled with love. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it had happened one small step at a time: Quentin's initial offer, her leap of faith in accepting, their gradual building of trust and friendship, and finally, the blossoming of genuine love between them. One crisp October morning, as Beatrice stood at the corral watching Quentin work with a young horse, she felt the baby move for the first time, a faint fluttering sensation like the wings of a butterfly. Her hand flew to her slightly rounded abdomen, a gasp of wonder escaping her lips. Quentin heard the sound and immediately turned, concern etched on his features. "Beatrice, what is it?" "The baby," she called, joy bubbling in her voice. "I felt the baby move." He vaulted over the corral fence and was at her side in moments, his work forgotten. "Just now." She nodded, taking his hand and placing it where hers had been. "Here. It might be too faint for you to feel yet, but this is where it happened." Though Quentin couldn't feel the movement himself, the wonder on Beatrice's face was enough to bring a rare, full smile to his usually serious features. "What did it feel like?" "Like butterfly wings," she tried to explain. "Just the lightest flutter, but unmistakable." He knelt suddenly before her, his hand still on her abdomen, and pressed a gentle kiss to the spot where their child grew. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his deep voice softer than Beatrice had ever heard it. "Your mama and papa are waiting for you." The simple, heartfelt gesture brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. This was the man beneath the hard exterior, the gentle soul who had been denied love as a child, but was determined to give it abundantly to his own. "I love you," she whispered, running her fingers through his hair. "Both of you." As autumn progressed and Beatrice's pregnancy became more evident, Quentin's protectiveness increased proportionally. He insisted she rest more frequently, encouraged her to delegate household tasks to Pete, and made sure she ate well at every meal. While his concern was touching, Beatrice occasionally found it excessive. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she reminded him one afternoon when he questioned her decision to collect eggs from the henhouse. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, usually while continuing to work." "Not my wife," he stated firmly. "Not with my child." Rather than argue, Beatrice tried to find a balance that would reassure Quentin without making her feel completely useless. She focused on lighter household tasks, spent more time keeping the ranch's account books in order, and took up knitting baby clothes, a skill Widow Jenkins had taught her during one of their visits to town. In November, the first significant cold front swept through the region, bringing freezing temperatures and a light dusting of snow. The cattle required extra attention to ensure they had adequate food and unfrozen water sources. Quentin and the hands worked from dawn to dusk, returning to the house, each evening exhausted but satisfied with their preparations for winter. On one such evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Beatrice raised a subject she had been considering for some time. "I've been thinking about names for the baby," she began, her knitting needles clicking steadily as she worked on a tiny sweater. Quentin looked up from his book with interest. "Any ideas?" "If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Robert after my father," she suggested tentatively. "And if it's a girl, maybe Elizabeth after your mother." Emotion flickered across Quentin's face at the mention of his mother's name. "You would do that. Name our daughter after her." "Of course," Beatrice said gently. "She was important to you and she would be the child's grandmother." "It seems fitting." Quentin was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "Elizabeth Beatrice Vance," he said finally. "That has a nice sound to it." "And Robert Quentin Vance," Beatrice added, pleased by his positive response. "Either way, a good, strong name." "A good name for a good life," Quentin agreed, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Better than I had, better than you had. That's what we're building here, Beatrice. Something better for the next generation." The simplicity and truth of his statement resonated deeply with Beatrice. Despite the unconventional beginning of their marriage, They had indeed created something precious and enduring, not just a working ranch or a convenient arrangement, but a true home, a place of love and hope. As winter settled fully over the Texas plains, life on the Circle V adjusted to the season's demands. The cattle required constant monitoring in the cold weather, especially during ice storms that could freeze water troughs and make grazing difficult. Quentin and the hands worked tirelessly to maintain the herd's health and comfort, often returning to the house with frost in their beards and exhaustion in their eyes. Beatrice focused on making the home a warm refuge from the harsh conditions outside. She baked bread daily, prepared hearty stews and roasts that would restore energy after long hours in the cold, and kept the fires burning steadily in both the kitchen and the sitting room. In the evenings, she read aloud while Quentin and Pete repaired tack or carved new handles for tools, practical work that could be done indoors during the long winter nights. Christmas approached with a festivity Beatrice hadn't expected on the isolated ranch. Pete revealed an unexpected talent for woodcarving, producing small toys for the expected child and a beautiful jewelry box for Beatrice. Samuel and Micah rode into town and returned with candy, oranges, and a small spruce tree that they installed in the corner of the sitting room. On Christmas Eve, after a special supper of roast goose and mince pie, they gathered in the sitting room to exchange gifts. Beatrice had knitted scarves for each of the men, embroidering their initials on one end, a personal touch that seemed to touch them deeply. "Ain't had a handmade gift since my mama was alive," Pete admitted gruffly, running his weathered fingers over the neat stitches. Quentin's gift to Beatrice was a rocking chair for the nursery, lovingly crafted in secret during the hours she thought he was in the barn repairing equipment. The gesture brought happy tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she told him, settling into the comfortable seat and testing its smooth motion. Absolutely perfect. Her gift to him was more modest, a new journal bound in soft leather, with his initials stamped on the cover. "For your thoughts and plans," she explained, "and someday for our child to know their father's mind and heart." The thoughtfulness of the gift clearly moved him. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the wind whistle around the eaves, Beatrice felt the baby kick vigorously against her ribs. "Someone's feeling festive," she commented, guiding Quentin's hand to feel the strong movements. At 6 months along, her belly was prominent now, and the baby's activities were easily felt from outside. "Strong," Quentin observed with pride, "like their mother." Beatrice smiled in the darkness, "and stubborn like their father." He chuckled, the rumble of his laughter vibrating against her back as he held her. "Poor child, inheriting our worst qualities." "Our best," she corrected gently, lacing her fingers with his where they rested on her abdomen. "Our very best." January brought a severe cold snap that tested everyone's endurance. For a week, temperatures remained well below freezing, with bitter winds that found every crack and crevice in the house. Quentin and the hands took turns checking the cattle day and night, ensuring that no animals were lost to the brutal conditions. Beatrice worried constantly during this period, both for the men working in the dangerous cold and for the baby, who seemed to be growing more active with each passing day. The addition to the house remained unfinished, the work halted by the extreme weather, and she found herself praying daily for a break in the cold that would allow the nursery to be completed before the baby's arrival. Her prayers were answered in early February. A sudden warming trend brought temperatures back to seasonal norms, melting the accumulated ice and snow and allowing outdoor work to resume. Quentin immediately redirected focus to the nursery, working alongside Samuel and Micah to complete the addition as quickly as possible. By the end of the month, the new room was finished, a small but perfect space adjoining the master bedroom, with a window facing east to catch the morning sun. Beatrice hung the curtains she had sewn during the long winter evenings. Pete installed shelves for baby supplies, and Quentin moved in the rocking chair and a cradle he had purchased on their last trip to town. Standing in the completed nursery, her hand resting on her now prominent belly, Beatrice felt a profound sense of readiness. The child would arrive in approximately 6 weeks, and everything was prepared: the physical space, the practical arrangements for the birth, and most importantly, the love that awaited this new life. "It's perfect," she told Quentin as he stood beside her, surveying their handiwork. "Absolutely perfect." He slipped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close to his side. "Just like its mother." March brought the first signs of spring to the Texas plains. Green shoots appeared in Beatrice's garden, wildflowers dotted the pastures, and the days grew noticeably longer. With the improved weather came increased activity on the ranch, as preparations began for the spring calving season and the annual roundup that would follow. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Beatrice insisted on maintaining as many of her normal activities as possible. She supervised the spring cleaning of the house, planted her garden with Pete's assistance, and continued to manage the household accounts with characteristic efficiency. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever known," Quentin told her one evening, though the pride in his voice belied any real criticism. "A perfect match for the most stubborn man, then," she countered with a smile. As her due date approached, Alina Winters moved temporarily into the ranch's spare bedroom, bringing her extensive midwifery experience and calm presence to the household. She examined Beatrice regularly, pronounced both mother and child to be in excellent health, and provided practical advice on everything from nursing to colic remedies. "First babies often take their time," she assured Beatrice when April arrived with no sign of labor. "Especially when the mother is as active and healthy as you are." The waiting was difficult for Quentin, who had thrown himself into preparations with such determination that the actual arrival of the child now seemed somehow anticlimactic. He found himself checking on Beatrice constantly, until she finally sent him to help Samuel with a broken fence just to give herself some peace. "You're hovering, my love," she told him gently. "The baby will come when it's ready, not a moment sooner, no matter how much you pace." It was the 15th of April, almost exactly a year since Beatrice had first approached Quentin outside the bank in Desdemona when her labor finally began. She was in the garden, helping Pete plant tomato seedlings despite his protests, when the first contraction gripped her. "Mrs. Winters," she called, straightening with one hand pressed to her lower back. "I think it's time." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. Alina proved to be everything Pete had promised: capable, calm, and encouraging as she guided Beatrice through the increasingly difficult contractions. Quentin, summoned from the north pasture by a breathless Micah, paced outside the bedroom door until Alina finally took pity on him and allowed him to join his wife. "She needs your strength now," the midwife told him. "Hold her hand and tell her she can do this." Beatrice's face, flushed and damp with perspiration, brightened at the sight of her husband. She reached for him with a weak smile. "I'm glad you're here." "Where else would I be?" he asked gruffly, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "You're doing wonderfully, my brave Beatrice." His presence seemed to give her renewed energy. With Quentin supporting her back and Alina providing expert guidance, Beatrice found the strength for the final, most difficult stage of labor. As the sun began to set outside their window, casting the room in golden light, she gave one last tremendous push and their child entered the world with a lusty, indignant cry. "A boy," Alina announced triumphantly, lifting the red-faced infant for them to see. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face as the baby was placed in her arms, his tiny body warm and wriggling against her chest. "Hello, Robert," she whispered, looking down at the perfect features of her son. "We've been waiting for you." Quentin seemed unable to speak, his eyes fixed on the small miracle they had created together. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. "He's perfect," he managed, "just like his mother." Beatrice looked up at her husband, seeing the unshed tears in his eyes. "Would you like to hold your son?" With infinite care, Quentin took the swaddled infant, cradling him as if he were made of the most delicate glass. The baby's cries quieted as he settled against his father's broad chest, his tiny hand working free of the blanket to grasp Quentin's finger with surprising strength. "Hello, son," Quentin said softly. "I'm your pa." The simple declaration, spoken with such wonder and commitment, brought fresh tears to Beatrice's eyes. This was the family they had created not from obligation or desperation, but from love and hope and shared purpose. As she watched her husband and son together, Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had married Quentin out of desperate need for security, expecting nothing more than basic survival. Instead, she had found a partner who respected her mind, valued her contributions, and ultimately loved her with a depth and tenderness she had never imagined possible. And Quentin, who had advertised for a wife with the practical expectations of a rancher needing a helpmate, had found not just a capable woman to run his household, but a true companion who challenged him, supported him, and helped him heal the wounds of his difficult past. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, not just a successful ranch or a comfortable home, but a family founded on mutual respect and genuine love. And now, with Robert's birth, that family was complete. In the days and weeks that followed, Beatrice and Quentin adjusted to their new roles as parents. Robert proved to be a good-natured baby, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined disposition. He quickly became the center of the household, with even gruff Pete melting at the sight of his toothless smile. By his first birthday, Robert was taking his first wobbling steps across the sitting room floor, reaching for his father with delighted giggles. Quentin, who had once seemed so stern and unyielding, transformed completely in his son's presence, getting down on the floor to play, making silly faces to elicit laughter, and telling bedtime stories with elaborate enthusiasm. "I never imagined you as such a natural father," Beatrice observed one evening as they watched their son sleep, his chubby fist curled around a wooden horse Pete had carved for him. Quentin smiled, the expression now coming easily to him. "I never imagined it either. But then, I never imagined finding you or being this happy." She leaned against him, content in the life they had built together. "From desperation to this," she mused. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures." "You taught me that," he said, turning to face her fully. "You taught me what hope feels like, Beatrice. What it means to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for that gift. And I'll spend the rest of mine being grateful that you placed that advertisement," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Best decision I ever made, marrying my cowboy." As they stood together in the nursery, their sleeping son a testament to the love they shared, Beatrice reflected on the curious path that had brought her to this happiness. She had indeed married Quentin out of desperation, but what had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into the deepest love she could have imagined. And through that love, she had discovered what true hope felt like, not just the absence of fear, but the positive expectation that tomorrow held joy and purpose and endless possibility. That was Quentin's greatest gift to her, far beyond the material security he had first offered. He had taught her to hope again, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. And together, they would teach that same precious lesson to their son, and to the other children they hoped would follow, building a legacy of love and hope that would endure long after they were gone. On the porch of the Circle V, under a star-filled Texas sky, Quentin wrapped his arm around Beatrice's shoulders and drew her close. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Vance," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Vance," she replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Here's to many, many more." And as they stood together, watching the moonlight silver the land that was their home and their future, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the desperate choice she had made a year ago had been not an end, but a beginning, the first step on a journey more beautiful than she could ever have imagined.